Okay, so at this stage now, I'm ready to come in and start inking my drawing. Okay, so the tools that you'll need for finishing this video is going to be your micron pen set, also a correction fluid. You're going to make sure that it's the squeezable and it's got a ballpoint tip on there. The color pencils that you've been using for her jacket and skin tones. I'm also using the Recollections white opaque marker. This is just doing some touch-ups out on the white paper if you need to. That's optional. And then Jelly Roll, I have the white ink as well as metallic silver ink. Now, if you've never done inking before, or if you haven't inked something in a long time, to start, you can always go back to your original pencil sketch and ink it out as kind of a practice to get ready before you do it on your final model. Also, if you're looking to watch a video on inking before you do this, you can go back to my videos where we are inking our croquis. So there's inking the walking pose as well as the standing pose. And then there's another one for inking the advanced static pose. So if you want, you can watch through those videos first and then come back and you can do some inking here on your original pencil drawing. The ink pens that I'm going to use for this demo are the Micron Fine Line pen set, and it's all black. If you go to buy this set, always make sure that you're getting just the black, because sometimes there'll be a set where it's too red, too blue, and too black. The numbers are very important as well. So for instance, this starts with 005 and goes to 1, 2, 3, 5, and 8. Some of these packs look identical, and it might just be all 3s or all 8s. And there's also another pack for people who do cartoon animation, and some of the pens are more like an ink brush. So be sure you're getting this exact pack for doing fashion illustration. If you're going to buy them individually, I would get 005, 1, 3, and 8. If you're not sure yet if you want to commit to any pens at all, you might already have some pens at home. The most important thing is that they are a felt tip pen and not a ballpoint. So for instance, Sharpie has a pen called the Fine Pen. There's also the Pilot Precise V5, and they also have a V7. And the V5 is a little smaller, V7 is a little larger. These are ballpoint, but the way they work, it looks very similar to the felt tip. And then there's one other one from Staedtler. They have a Triple Plus fine liner as well. So these are just some less expensive versions of really good ink pens if you don't want to commit to buying the Micron pen set just yet. For me, after I buy the pen set, I like to just cut the top off, and I keep this container as my holder for my pens to keep them all together. Of course, you'll want to store these horizontally, so don't have them in a cup or else the tips are going to dry out. And if you have them in there upside down, there's going to be wet puddles inside of all the pen caps. So just store them horizontally. Alright, let's get started. We're going to finish our jacket and glossy boots. So here on her leg, I have just a little bit of a skin tone coming out onto the white paper. And if I wanted to make that disappear, what I would do is I would use this marker here. So this is the Recollections opaque marker. And I'm not sure exactly what the chemicals are inside of here, but I don't think it's oily. So to me, this feels more dry, similar to the whiteout Paper Mate. You can see on here it has a broad tip. I just want to make sure it's totally clean. And what I'll do is I'll come in here right by her leg and just get that one spot. And it's similar to your chart back markers where you have to let it dry, come back, stack it a second time, let it dry, come back, stack it a third time. If we come over here and we look at her sleeve, I have just a little bit where my markers had bled out beyond. So I can do the same thing here. I'll come in, I'll lay down one wash, and it's mixing a little bit with the color pencil from the top. So I just come in here, wipe off some of that color pencil, and come back and hit it again. So I'll let that dry, and then I'll come back and get it one last time, and that's about enough. Also, if there's little tiny areas like here is the arm from her sleeve, and then this is her main body, and there's a little tiny white negative space here, and it just got a little bit dirty, so I'll come in with my Jelly Roll pen, and I just want to come back and just touch up a little bit of that white paper so it looks nice and crisp, and you get that separation between her arm and her jacket. And you want to be really careful that you don't go in and start touching up every single edge all the way around your girl, or after a while you're going to start seeing all of these white halos around it and it looks really strange. So we're just doing a couple little tiny touch-ups if it's important. One other point I like to make is you're doing this by hand. This isn't a computer or a machine or a printer or a silkscreen. So having some mistakes on here actually looks really cool. So don't cover up every single mistake that you can find. What I want to do now is I want to ink starting from the top, and I'll work my way to the bottom. That way my hand doesn't accidentally smear any ink. Also, another thing I like to do is if I start with my smallest ink, usually I'll come in and I'll hit those areas that need that size pen. And then I'll move on to the next size pen and get those areas as well. So let's start up here at her hat and her face. Okay, so I want to come in here and I'm going to start with my smallest ink. And this is the size 005. You have to remember when you're using this pen that you can easily crush that little tiny felt tip. So don't press at all. You're just lightly gliding over the top of the paper. Let the pen ink soak into the paper without pressing. At the top of the ball here, it's supposed to look like it's a very light, fluffy, and furry ball. So I'm going to just hit these edges with my 005 marker. Now for the hat itself, I'm going to skip to a different size marker. So what I'll do is I'll come down here to her eyes and eyelashes. So follow along with me here. So watch me first. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and start inking her eyes, her iris, the pupils. And I also want to keep in mind that some of her hair is coming down across her face and across her eyes. So I don't want to draw these eyes perfect all the way through because the hair is breaking it up a little bit. And then I'll come in and I'll add a few little eyelashes and eyebrows. And then of course I want to get some ink here on her nose and the center of her mouth and the bottom of her bottom lip. Now be really careful to not ink anything here for the ridge of her nose. If you ink that, it'll start to look funny. Now if you'll notice on her lips, I never draw the upper lip. For me personally, I think it gets really distracting and it almost starts to look like a mustache. I have seen some designers where they do it really well. For me, I just like to leave it alone. Now what I'm going to do is some of these hairs that are coming across her eye, I'm going to go ahead and get those with my smallest pen right now. So I'm going to carefully come in here and draw just the thinnest, lightest little wispy hairs that'll cross over her eye and across her face. Now for doing her jawline, ears, her neck, and also the edges of this beanie cap, I'm going to switch now up to my size 1 ink. What I'm going to do now is, as I draw the outside edges of the beanie cap, once the curve starts going along the top of her head, I want to make these look like little ridges from the cable knit. And then I can come down into the brim of her hat, down close by her eyes, and also make this look like it's a little bit thick and chunky. The ball of the cap here, where we have this furry little ball on top, I want to make it darker as it's going behind the cap. So I can do that now with my thicker ink pen. And I'm following the shaping of the ball, and I'm making sure to not touch anything at the top because I want to look like that is really thin and wispy and just floating away. Now before I start drawing on her jaw and neck, I just want to make sure there's no color pencil on my ink. Again, some of her hair is breaking up the jawline and her ears, so I don't want to draw those totally perfect all the way through. I want to make it look like it's a broken line. Once I come down to the neck, I want to start really dark underneath her jaw, and then I lighten up as I come down to her chest area. And then her shoulders going behind her jacket are nice and dark. And then when I do some detail work on her throat and collarbone, I'm doing that very lightly. Now while I'm still working with this size 1, I'm going to also come in here and get a little more detail in her hair. Now as you're doing this, you'll want to follow the flow of what the hair is doing. If you need, you can also reference a photo to give you an idea of what you're going to do. And then just keep it really simple. Don't get too crazy with doing this, or else there'll be too much ink in her hair and it won't look like flowy brown hair. Now staying with this size of the ink, I also want to come down here and get the belt buckle and her hands. For the belt buckle, I've done a really good job of keeping this white the whole time. If you have some color that bled into that, don't worry, we're going to cover it up in a little bit, and then we're going to make this look like it's silver. Now as I come down here to her hand, I need to really concentrate on the different sizes of each finger. Right now when you come in and ink it, you can actually start messing up what you've done so far. So we know the pinky is the smallest, then her ring finger is medium size, also the pointer is medium size, and this is the middle finger, the largest one. So I would recommend start with the middle finger, and then you can gauge how to make the other ones look smaller. The first 3 fingers are all on a profile view, so I'm not even going to worry about drawing the fingernail. But the pinky finger here starts to roll out and it's flat facing out towards the camera. So we can come in here and just throw a little bit of a pinky nail on there. And I went back to using my 005 size ink. Now while we're using the size 01 on her skin for her face and neck and her hands, let's come down here to her legs and let's go ahead and be consistent by using the same size on the leg skin as well. Now where her skin is coming out from underneath the hem of her jacket and her skirt, I want the skin there to look really dark, as if though it's going up underneath these. So I'm going to take my size 3 pen. I'm going to start at the shadow area. So I'm going to start here at my hem, press this in a little darker, and then I'll lighten up as I come out. So now we have more of a nuanced line where it's thicker here in the shadow and it's lighter as it comes out into the light area. Now that I've inked her face and beanie, her hand and belt buckle, and her legs, I want to let this dry completely before I come back up and start inking her jacket. I'm going to start here on the light side of the jacket using my size 3. The reason I want to use size 3 is because this fabric itself is very chunky, so I want the ink to feel and look kind of chunky as well. Once we move into the shadow side, then I'm going to switch all the way up to my size 8. So this is the largest one. So get both of your pens ready and we'll come in here and we'll start inking the jacket. Now when we start inking this, there's two things we want to do. Number one, you want to always be conscious of where the light source is. And number two, we're going to ink these in puzzle pieces. So for instance, I want to ink the upper collar totally separate from the lapel rolling out. I want to ink the buttons separate from when I'm inking the sleeves and the main bodice. And this will help your eye to separate the differences between all of these parts. So you'll notice here what we're going to do is we're going to ink nice and thick and dark in the shadow areas, and then as we come out to the light, your inking will get really thin and light. In some areas, for instance on the sleeve right here, I didn't ink anything at all, so this is just back to the original pencil line. So you don't have to go and ink every single thing on here all the way around, or else it might start to look kind of like a Sunday cartoon. Now as I'm inking the collar, what I want to do is I want to start where the collar goes behind her neck. This way I can start with my ink nice and dark, and then as I come out onto her shoulders, I can lighten it up. Now when I come in here to ink the buttons, if the light source is coming from here, what I want to ink is what would be the shadow. So this is the shadow side of my button. So that's what I was doing here at the lapel. I was inking the shadow side of the button, and then I was continuing with inking the lapel. Let's come over to this side of the sleeve. Again, you don't have to draw the whole entire sleeve the whole way because the light is hitting this. What I want to do is I want to separate it from the jacket and then come out into the light source. Down here where there's some wrinkles, I'll come in, pick up those wrinkles, and lighten back up as I go away. And here where her jacket is going behind her hip, I can start dark and then work my way back up into the light. Now if you have an area, so for instance, I was drawing up and then I stopped and it feels a little too abrupt. If I try to pick up and get a thin line again, I might not quite get what I'm looking for. But what I can do is go back to my 005 and I can come in here and get that line to turn into just a little tiny pin line. And then of course I have where it's stopping completely out here in the light area. So here using my size 3, I've come in and basically look like the same on both sides. Then I can switch to my 8 and I can make this nice and wide and dark going behind her neck, here on the shadow side of her collar and the lapel, and where the lapel is going behind the extension. So having these few spots of a thicker, darker ink is going to make this side of her jacket look a little bit darker than that side. Now when I come over to this sleeve, I want to do the same thing. I want the sleeve to look and feel like it's a little more in the shadow. So I'll switch back to my size 3. We'll come in here, get the bodice, the seam from the sleeve, little fold in the armpit, and then the sleeve coming out and having some more wrinkles. Here at the elbow bend, sometimes I'll just throw a straight line and then I'll pick up from where I left off. Again, that was all with my size 3. Now what I want to do is switch to my size 8 and make this just look a little more thicker and darker. Let's start here where the sleeve is going behind her armpit, as well as the cap of the sleeve here, and then of course all the way down here along her cuff and her forearm. I want to make it dark here going where her belt is hanging over her arm, and a little darker where these wrinkles are on the side of her body. So I'm going to just continue doing this now down here for the drape of her jacket. Again, I'll start on the light side with 3. I don't have to ink every single square into this. Something here that I want to emphasize is this charcoal gray skirt is showing through just a little bit. You want to make sure you do not sit here and draw a triangle for the skirt itself, or else it's going to look strange that there's this floating triangle. So you want to be really consistent that you're drawing the line here for one side of the jacket, and you're drawing the line here for the other side of the jacket. And then at the very end, we're only going to draw just the hem of the skirt itself. Now that I did size 3 here on the darker side of her jacket, I'm going to come in with my 8 and emphasize some of the shadows. So here where her jacket is going behind her hand, I want to start there nice and dark, and then come out onto the body and I'll let off. Over here where the jacket has a slight fold, I'll get this outside edge of the fold nice and dark, down to the hem area. Here where her jacket is going behind the extension, I'll get it nice and dark, and then I'll come out onto the body. Now at the very end, I'll draw the hem for the skirt going straight across. So you can see with the different line qualities that are passing by the skirt, it doesn't look like a floating little gray triangle. Now so far we haven't done anything with the belt itself. Personally, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to use my size 8 on the belt, and I'll probably use the size 8 for her boots. And that will really help separate the belt away from the jacket. I'm also going to switch back to my size 1, and I'll throw just a couple other little holes here in her belt. Now while we're looking at this belt, let's go ahead and talk about making it look like it's silver. If I were to come in and just color it flat gray, it wouldn't quite look the same. What we're looking for is some kind of a marker that has a metallic element to it. So for instance, here's Sharpie Silver Metallic. And then there's also the Jelly Roll Metallic, and then this is the silver. So here's what the Silver Metallic from Sharpie looks like. And it doesn't have a very metallic glitter look to it. And this is the Jelly Roll pen. And it might be hard for you to see on the camera, but the Jelly Roll has some definite little sparkles inside of there. I want to come in here with my Silver Metallic Jelly Roll, and I'm going to color this metallic, but also keeping in mind that the light source is coming from here, so I want to leave just a little bit of some reflective highlights. So simply put, this bottom corner is silver, and up here I'm leaving just a little bit of some highlight edge on there. Now the Jelly Roll pen is a little bit thicker than your normal ink, and it takes longer to dry. So at this stage, I want to make sure I do not touch anything, and I'm going to just let that silver dry completely. Now that the belt buckle has completely dried, I'm going to come back in with my smallest ink size, and I just want to emphasize some of these highlights. And also, because the silver pen is opaque, it covered up a little bit of my original black outline. So I'm going to come back in here and just get that nice and crisp again. Now I don't know if you'll be able to see it on the video, but the belt buckle itself has a little bit of a metallic to it. Alright, let's finish up inking by coming down here to her fishnets and her boots. I'm going to switch back to my size 1 ink, and I'm going to turn this upside down because I want to be able to use the curve of my wrist for drawing these nice and clean. Now since I have it flipped over upside down, I have to remember that the light source is on this side. And what we'll do is we'll get a nice crisp edge here for the flat band at the top of her knee highs. Now if some of your gray bled up onto her leg, you might want to come back and whatever markers you were using for her skin tone, you can come in and just do little fixes onto her leg as needed, but don't do anything going below. Now what I'm going to do is here on the shadow side, I'm going to start doing these vertical lines for 2 reasons. This should look and feel almost like it's some kind of a knit band, but also I want to put some shadows in here. So I'm starting with a lot of lines in the shadow area, and as I come out onto the lighter side, I stop doing it. Now for the fishnets, it's going to be a diamond shape. So if you want to do a practice, what you're going to be doing is cutting down on a bias, and then eventually we'll flip and we'll do a bias from the other direction. So you're getting these diamond shapes. But something else I want to do is I want my lines to have a little bit of a curve to it because it's going around her body. Now, since I'm right-handed, I'm going to get all of my lines going along this direction, and then I'll turn my paper around. So now I'm turning it in this direction so I can get my crisscross lines going the other way, but still keeping with that slight curve. To finish the edges, we want to have it be bumpy, as if it's flowing off of each of the fishnets. Now, if I were to see a lot more of the fishnet, I would probably want to come in and throw a little more cast shadows. You can either do that by adding some more of your gray from the back, or on the front here, if you wanted to, you could take a black or a dark gray color pencil and throw a little bit of some shadowing in there. For us, since it's such a small area for the knee-high socks showing through, I'm not even going to worry about doing shadows on this. For the boots, I want to mostly use my size 8. But in some of the highlight areas, as well as a little bit of the detail work, I want to have a smaller one. So I'm going to use my size 3. And I'm going to go ahead and start with that one now. So with my size 3, I'm going to ink over here at the top of the boots. I want to make sure that the inside curves of the boot don't touch the outside silhouette. That way the boots look thick up at the top edge. And I'll go ahead and finish up this buckle on her right side. Now once I start to do this line all the way down the boot, it's got to be one clean, beautiful line the whole way. Once I get down to the wrinkles at her ankles, I can stop and then come back and pick up from where I left off. I'm going to do the same thing here along the highlight side of this boot. And I'll use my size 3 to get a little bit of this detail on the buckle here. What I want to do now is I'm going to switch to my size 8 and we're going to work on the shadow side of her boots. I also want to turn my project sideways, so using my right hand I can get a really nice clean swoop all the way down to the wrinkles. And then I'm also heavy down at the very bottom edge. So again, I'll show you one more time, just starting from the buckle all the way down, one clean swoop, all the way down to her ankle. Now for this outside edge of her shoe, I want to get this nice and dark and thick because this would all be in the shadow area on her foot. Now for the heel of her boot, it's a little more detailed, so I'm going to switch back to my smaller pen. Now so far these boots look great. We have a nice crisp outline all the way around. We've separated out all the workmanship for the buckles and a little bit here on the shoes and drawn in some of the wrinkles. If you want to make the glossy highlights pop even more, then what you can do is you can draw right down the side of the highlights. Come over here to this area where we practiced and throw in an arrow where this is your light source. And then what we're going to do is, using the largest one, the size 8, following along your stark white line, we're going to put a black line right up against it here on what would be the shadow side. So go ahead and do a few practice ones. So you'll notice I'm following right along the edge of the white, giving it a nice sharp high contrast by having the black up against the white. This first boot here I have where it's like an L shape, so it's going to start along the top and then moves all the way down the shadow side. Now the second highlight I have here, I don't want to emphasize it too much. What I can do is I can switch down to my size 3 and just lightly come and do the same thing, but not as thick of a line. And then I'll do the same thing here for the other boot. So again, I'm using my size 8. I'm following along the shadow side of the highlight, and I'm getting one nice clean line the whole way through. Now once we move down into the wrinkles on her shoe and some of this other highlight detail, I'm going to switch back down to my size 3. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm following on the shadow side of my highlights, emphasizing some of that white. And again, if you're not sure what to do, just look at your photo for a reference and duplicate something similar to what you see. And then up here in the buckle area, I just want to emphasize a little bit of these highlight markings. And then to finish this off, I want the shoe to look like it's hitting flat down onto the ground, and I almost want to have some kind of a cast shadow on here. I'm going to put in a thicker black sole that's touching down to the floor. And then I'll do the same here for her stiletto heel. Now the other shoe is kind of like pointing towards us, so you wouldn't see too much of this. But I still want to have a sense of a cast shadow on the floor. So I'm going to make this double thick on the shadow side of her shoe. Alright, so similar to what we've done here for her fishnets, this is kind of a cross hatching that we're doing with our ink. And you can do this for emphasizing some shadow areas as well. The thing that I would recommend is if you're not confident in cross hatching, don't do any at all. But if you're somewhat familiar with it or you love it, then go ahead and do that at this time. So for instance, here we have this buckle that's going around the shoe. And we would have some kind of a cast shadow here, so you could throw just a little bit of a cross hatching coming down to show that it's turning the corner. You might want to emphasize down here that the heel of her shoe is in the shade, maybe a little bit along the side of her foot. And for me personally, I don't like to do too much, especially because sometimes you'll do some cross hatching in the shadows, and all of a sudden you ruined your picture. For me, I don't like to do any cross hatch shadowing on her skin unless it's the walking pose and it's the foot that's going back into space. Here on the skirt, I want to just emphasize a little bit more that it's going behind this fold. So I might just do a slight cross hatching inside of here. And up here on her belt, it looks a little bit flat, so I'm going to add some cross-hatching shadowing to separate out the layers. Alright, so this is looking really good now, having all the ink on here, the different nuances of the ink sizes, and everything popped really well down here on the glossy boots. The last thing that I want to do is I'm going to put some of this white back on here on this texture, and the jelly roll will go over everything. It'll go over the ink, it'll go over the color pencils and everything. You can see here on my fabric that it's got the furry texture, and then the fur itself bounces back a lot of white light to your eye, so I want to come back and recapture that on her jacket. I can also touch up a little bit here, give her some highlights on her eyes. So I'm taking a look here at some of the practice swatches that I did. Basically, I'm just doing a little bit of some swirls and only up in the highlight areas. Again, when you're doing a texture like this, we only need to represent about 75% of what the actual fabric looks like. Now, as I'm going over it, I'm going to get a lot of color pencil onto my pen, so I'll have to keep cleaning it off so I can get some really nice white back on top of everything. So you can see here I'm just getting in the highlight areas, and then I'm purposely going a little bit on top of some of my black ink lines to show that it's fur sticking out. When I move over here to the more shadow side of her body, I'm going to do a lot less of this. Down here where there's wrinkles at her elbow, and I just drew kind of just like a straight line where her elbow bend is. I can also just come over here and break that up a little more with my white. Okay, so I'm going to come over here to her hip area, and this is again in the light source. So I'm going to get a lot of white highlights all along the top edges of the swirls. Down here along the fold of her jacket, I want to break up some of that black ink by having my white ink go right on top of it. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side of her jacket as well, making sure to not have all of these swirls perfectly lined up and too mechanical looking. Now ultimately I don't want to get too crazy with this, and I think everything that I've done so far looks good enough. What I want to do is up here on her beanie, I could emphasize just a little more of these cable knits. See if I can get this white to help that just pop a little more. And then here where we have the ball on top is flying away into these little tiny thin wispy hairs. I can come in and almost start to erase some of the color by adding my white back into here. And then I'll just hit this one last time with my smallest ink pen to show the little flyaway hairs. Okay, so taking a close look here at her eyes, what I want to do is I want to put a little bit of some white right on top of her eye, right next to the pupil. And this is going to help her eye to look wet. I'll let that dry for a minute, and then I'll come back with my black ink and just touch up the pupil one last time. Alright, so I think that's it. Let's go ahead and take one last look at this. So here we have the beanie cap with the cable knit and the little furry ball on top. She's a brunette. Some of her hair is in her eyes. We come down and we have the jacket that matches back to the fabric swatch. We also have a coordinating belt that's not the exact same color as the jacket, but pretty darn close. And then all the way down here, we have the boots that are also almost the same color as the jacket. We've got the charcoal skirt underneath, charcoal knee highs, and then the boots have a nice glossy hit to them, so it looks like she's ready for some rain and winter. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed doing this video for the winter coat and glossy boots. In the next video, we're going to be doing a prom dress, and again, you're going to pick out your fabric for a silk layer, a sheer layer, as well as a sparkle layer. And then we're going to finish the drawing with all of the mixed media techniques, so you'll have your sparkly sheer dress, diamond earrings, and metallic shoes.